Missouri usually brings to mind BBQ and lakeside cabins. But there are places here that locals refuse to even name. A poison town, a road where floating lights don't belong to any car, and communities that look like they were abandoned on purpose. Today, if you've ever thought Missouri was a safe place to retire, it's time to reconsider. This is the top 10 most remote and creepiest towns in Missouri, where history cracks through the pavement and the stories after dark feel more like a true crime documentary than real-life number. 10. Spencer. Spencer is the kind of place that makes you wonder if your eyes are playing tricks on you. You are rolling along old Route 66, nothing but fields and sky. Then suddenly this tiny knot of buildings appears around a bend. There is a little gas station with vintage pumps, a squat stone storefront, a barbershop museum that looks exactly like the kind of spot where your grandpa would pull over for a coffee and a cheap haircut. Just down the way, an old steel bridge sits over the creek, all angles and rust, like a movie prop that never got hauled back to the studio. For a few seconds, it feels cozy and oddly photogenic, the kind of place you could turn into a very smug road trip post. At first glance, Spencer is pure nostalgia bait. Big Midwestern sky, the familiar Route 66 shield, empty concrete that looks like it should have classic cars parked on it. Your brain starts filling in friendly details that are not really there. You imagine voices inside the cafe and the hiss of a grill, but here is the twist. The postcard never turned into real life. In the 1960s, the highway moved and the cars that kept this little stop breathing simply stopped coming. No dramatic factory closure, no public scandal, just one quiet decision on a map that turned down the volume on an entire town. The stone buildings stayed where they were. The sign that says cafe stayed in the window. The gas pumps waited like props on a closed set. The people left. Then years later, visitors came back for all the wrong reasons. Instead of families or new business owners, it was bored vandals and thrill seekers. Around 2015, locals discovered broken glass, damaged interiors, chunks of restoration work smashed apart for fun. Imagine being so forgotten that when the world finally remembers you, it is only to knock a few more pieces off. That is when the cute factor starts to feel a little rotten. Now try to picture Spencer at night. The road squeezes down to a single strip of concrete. The bridge feels too narrow. There are no streetlights, no neon, only your own headlights sliding over the stone faces of the buildings for half a second at a time before they drop back into black. Gravel cracks under your tires. Wind pushes through loose metal and old signs and makes a thin, hollow whistle that almost sounds like breath. No kids on bikes. No porch talk. No television glow. The town does not feel abandoned. It feels paused, like someone hit stop on 1955 and then lost the remote under the couch. Spencer is what happens when your whole life savings is one road and one gas pump. When the road leaves, the whole picture freezes. So would you really pull over here at 11 at night just because you are low on gas? If you love the idea of being the only living soul on Main Street, then yes, this is your stop. Just do not expect anyone to hear you if something goes wrong. And Spencer is only the warm-up. The next town on this list did not simply fade away. It was swallowed by the very industry that built it. Number 9. Phenix is not the kind of marble town you see on a tourist brochure, but once it almost could have been. For a while, this company village in Missouri was carving out a name for itself in stone. The rock under its feet turned into trim for banks and courthouses across the country, sold under names like Napoleon Gray. Imagine living where the sidewalks, the bank, and even the church all share the same smooth gray shine. So stepping out your front door feels a little like walking through the lobby of a 5-star hotel. On paper, that sounds like a success story. Then the story tilts. Phenix was never really a town first. It was a quarry with people attached. When the plant ran, the place glowed with harsh industrial light. Rail lines cut past back doors, flat cars loaded with stone rattled by, crushers and saws chewed at the hill from dawn until after dark. In one old quarry photo, a handwritten note quietly mentions a worker killed by a train. just another cost buried in all that polished marble. Folks here did not just live next to the job. They lived inside the machine. In time, the outside world changed its mind. The Great Depression hit, public projects dried up, and later, when war metal was worth more than stone, the easiest thing to cut was steel. Tracks were pulled and sold, equipment hauled away, and families packed for towns that were not built on one product and one company. The marble stayed in the ground. Phenix as a community did not. Walk into what is left today and your brain hesitates. The quarry is alive in the technical sense. Conveyors crawl, dust hangs in the air, the smell of wet rock sits in your nose, and somewhere out of sight, metal clangs against metal. At the same time, there are ghost outlines of streets, broken slabs where houses stood, single brick walls leaning in a field of crushed stone. It feels like a body kept breathing only so the organs can be harvested. They did not just mine the stone here, they mined the town. So would you really hike into an active quarry ghost town just for a cool photo? Unless you enjoy trespassing in heavy industrial sites where nobody expects to see a random stranger, maybe this is one place you admire from a safe distance on a screen. Because if a town eaten by its quarry already feels unsettling, wait until the road itself starts fighting back, with floating lights in the dark. Number 8. Hornet is the sort of place that should be boring. On a map, it is just a few low hills, some scattered farms, and a skinny country road that wanders along the Missouri and Oklahoma state line. In the daylight, it looks harmless. Fence posts lean a little, hay bales sit in the fields, and the dirt track ahead could be any back road people use to shave a few minutes off the drive to town. On paper, it is just farmland and a shortcut. In reality, once the sun drops and the last real headlights disappear, this is where car lights go to die and something else seems to clock in for the night shift. Locals call it the Joplin Spook Light, a glowing ball that has been reported here for well over a century. People describe a single light floating down the road, splitting into two, merging again, drifting off into the trees, and then snapping out as if someone flicked a switch. The stories attached to it are the kind you only tell after you check that the door is locked. A miner who lost his head in an accident and is still stumbling along with a lantern. A native couple torn apart, one waiting on the trail, the other searching forever. Spirits left behind on the forced march known as the Trail of Tears, wandering in the dark and refusing to move on. Science keeps trying to wrap these tales up in words like refracted light and temperature inversion. The locals mostly shrug, say maybe, and make sure they are home before it gets truly dark. If you really want to see it, the unofficial ritual is simple. You drive out to the stretch of road, kill your engine, and sit. No streetlights, no houses, no neon sign to remind you there is a gas station somewhere within reach. Just the chirp of insects, the hiss of wind in the grass, and the long, quiet hum inside your own skull. Some nights nothing happens at all. Some nights a faint glow appears down the lane and drifts towards you without growing bigger, like something that is near and far at the same time. That is when you notice the second layer of unease. Every now and then, another car rolls up behind you with its lights off until the last moment, and you realize you are being watched by people and maybe by something that does not drive. Out here, there are no park rangers, no patrol car idling in the distance, just an unmarked road and your own common sense. Maybe the spook light is a trick of the horizon, a neat little magic show pulled by the atmosphere, or maybe, as some folks like to put it, the highway finally grew an eyeball and decided to stare back. Most towns have normal streetlights. This place has a streetlight with commitment issues that keeps ghosting you and then showing up again when you least expect it. So ask yourself honestly, would you kill your engine on a pitch-black country road just to chase a light that is not supposed to exist? If you do, at least pull well off the pavement. The last thing you ever see should be a very real pickup truck, not a paranormal one. Of course, one creepy back road is bad enough. Things get a lot stranger when an entire town loses its fight with the river and decides to move away. Number 7. Old Pattonsburg. Old Pattonsburg started out as the kind of farm town where drama meant someone parked their tractor in front of the wrong driveway. It sat low along the Grand River with a simple main street, a white church with a steeple, a school, and a handful of mom-and-pop shops that all knew the same kids by name. On a good summer evening, you could stand in the middle of town and hear a baseball game at the school, a hymn leaking out of the church, and somebody shouting for their dog down by the riverbank. It was the sort of place where people expected the seasons to change and the river to rise a bit every spring, but not much else. That calm made what came next feel like a betrayal. In 1993, the Grand River did not just rise a little, it climbed out of its banks and kept going, turned streets into channels and pushed muddy water through living rooms and storefronts. People hauled soaked couches onto the lawn, hosed mud off pews, told each other they would rebuild. Then the water came back again a few months later and made the message clear. This was no longer a one-time thing. You can sandbag once, you can sandbag twice. At some point you realize the river is not negotiating. It is evicting you, so the town did something almost no one expects a town to do. It moved. With help from federal money and a lot of quiet grief, families packed up what they could, watched bulldozers knock down what could not be saved, and shifted up onto higher ground. New Pattonsburg was born on the ridge. Old Pattonsburg stayed down in the floodplain like an empty shell. On paper, it was progress. On the ground, it felt more like a body being left for the river to pick over. Walk the old streets today and it is hard to tell where pavement ends and nature begins. The asphalt is cracked and laced with grass. There are houses with windows punched out, steps that now lead straight into thickets, single brick walls standing by themselves like they missed the memo. Trees grow through former foundations. At night there are no streetlights, no porch bulbs, only frog song and insects so loud they almost feel like static in your ears. It is less like visiting a historic site and more like wandering onto a movie set after a war film wrapped and everyone went home, leaving the ruined village behind. The difference here is that the people were real. Their photos and kitchen tables and childhood bedrooms floated away. The sense that something is still down there watching never quite does. Old Pattonsburg is what it looks like when the river sends an eviction notice and actually follows through. It is a reminder that disaster checks can help you move your house, but they cannot move your ghosts. So would you really wander around a deserted floodplain town with no cell, signaled just to feel the history? Out here, if you twist an ankle or if the water comes up faster than the forecast, there is no coffee shop around the corner to bail you out. But at least in Old Pattonsburg, nature was the villain. Our next stop is what happens when greed builds a luxury resort and then disappears the moment the bill comes due. Number 6. Indian Ridge Resort. Indian Ridge Resort was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Ozarks, a $1.6 billion wonderland promising villas, lakeside boardwalks, a shopping village, and even a water park big enough to make Branson feel like it finally joined the 21st century. On the brochure, this place looked like Discount Disney meets Lake Tahoe, the kind of glossy dream that convinces investors to sign checks before asking a single real question. For a moment, it almost worked. Roads were paved, foundations poured, and rows of oversized McMansions rose like a suburban Camelot on a hill. But then reality showed up with a calculator. Construction stopped mid-stride, leaving entire streets lined with half-finished castles. Windows stared out like empty eye sockets and balconies led nowhere. The developer spiraled into lawsuits, fraud charges piled up, and violations of the Clean Water Act turned the project from luxury getaway into federal crime scene. By the time the dust settled, the only things living here were weeds, mildew, and the occasional confused tourist who took a wrong turn. Walk through it today and the vibe hits instantly. The air has that damp basement smell, the kind that clings to old drywall and broken promises. Wind loops through the faux European roofs and whistles in a way that feels a little too intentional. When you drive in, the subdivision looks perfect from a distance, almost beautiful, until you notice the part that matters most. There are 0 cars in the driveways. It feels less like a neighborhood and more like a cutscene from a horror game where you keep waiting for a character to spawn. But nobody ever does. And of course, none of this was an accident. The whole resort was a house of cards built on leverage, fantasy, and the blind faith that the Branson boom would never slow down. Investors bought dreams, developers sold smoke. Now the result sits here like a gated community for your worst financial decisions. Think of it as an HOA from hell where all the residents vanished, leaving only the ghosts of bad loans drifting between the walls. So ask yourself, would you really sneak into a collapsing luxury ghost resort just for a TikTok? Between the rotten floors, the private security, and the ticks waiting in the tall grass, this is not the cheap vacation your retirement fund needs. And if you think this mess is unsettling, remember that Indian Ridge is recent. Our next town has had over a century for its ghosts to get organized. Number 5. AVILLA. AVILLA is the kind of place that fools you the moment you roll in. By daylight. It looks like a sleepy little farm village that simply refuses to disappear. One of the oldest settlements in Jasper County, still clinging to Route 66 with worn-in pride. There is a small church, a tiny post office, a handful of stubborn houses, and just enough residents to keep the place from fading off the census map. At noon, it feels almost cute, almost normal, like a rural postcard that never gets updated. But AVILLA lives a double life, and the second one only comes out after dark. The real story starts with the Civil War. While most towns saw the war come and go, AVILLA lived right in the fire line. Raids, ambushes, homes set ablaze, families fleeing in the night, the kind of chaos that leaves dents in a town's memory long after the shooting stops. Locals say AVILLA never truly returned to peace. What you hear today isn't quiet living. It is the silence left behind when history has already taken too much. Then there is the folklore, the part that gives AVILLA its chill. The most infamous legend is Rotten Johnny Reb, a Confederate guerrilla said to have met a mysterious end. According to old stories passed around porches and family tables, his remains were displayed on a lonely oak as a warning to anyone who dared bring trouble back to town. The tree absorbed the whispers, the fear, and the unfinished business. People soon called it the Death Tree. Travelers swear they've seen shapes in their mirrors, shadows moving behind them, or reflections in dark windows that vanish too quickly. Even lifelong residents admit they avoid looking toward certain porches after sunset. Walk through AVILLA at night and the shift is unmistakable. A few isolated porch lights glow across empty lots where shops once stood. The air feels heavier, colder, like it carries old stories whether you asked for them or not. The death tree rises beside the road, its branches creaking in a way that suggests memory more than wind. And the question naturally creeps in. Would you really park your car beneath a tree that locals literally call the death tree? Would you step out knowing the legends say the land beneath your shoes remembers more than it reveals? If you like to joke about ghosts, AVILLA might be the place that makes you rethink your material. And if a haunted oak with a century of folklore doesn't faze you, don't get comfortable. Our next destination wasn't built for ghosts. It was built as a health spa in the woods and somehow ended with more drownings than cures. Number 4. WELCH Spring Hospital. WELCH Spring Hospital began with a dream that almost sounded ahead of its time. Imagine a doctor in the early 1900s scouting the Ozark wilderness and declaring that clean spring air could heal damaged lungs. He found a pristine turquoise spring tucked deep in the woods and decided it was the perfect natural therapy machine. He built a stone hospital directly at the mouth of a cave, added a small dam to trap the cold air, and envisioned patients breathing their way back to health. Basically an early 1900s wellness influencer, except he actually had a medical degree. But the dream ran into a problem that no medical theory could fix. The place was too remote. There were no paved roads, no easy access, and absolutely no way sick patients could comfortably travel miles down rocky trails. They simply never came. The doctor passed away, the experiment dissolved with him, and the half-finished facility was swallowed by the forest. Today, the ruins sit like a stone skeleton beside the spring, cracked walls lean toward the river, rusted bars cling to empty windows. The cave's mouth exhales a stream of cold air that feels almost intentional, like the place is breathing even though nothing lives there. Children once played around the water, but locals still recall tragic accidents near the slick rocks. The kind of stories that spread quietly in towns like Acres. One slip on that limestone and the river won't stop to ask how good your insurance is. The atmosphere hits you long before you reach the main structure. The soundscape is nothing but rushing water echoing off the cave. There's the scent of wet moss, the chill of cave air drifting across your arms even in July, and the sight of water so blue it feels unreal, until you realize no one can see the bottom. The stones are slick, there are no guardrails, and once the sun dips, the entire valley dims into complete darkness. No lights, no markers, just cold water and deeper, cold silence. The failure of Welch Spring wasn't because the idea was bad, it was ambition colliding with isolation. It's like building a hospital at the end of a hiking trail and wondering why the waiting room is empty. Welch Spring stands as a monument to how far one man would go to fight disease, and how far nature will go to pretend he never showed up. So let me ask, would you really take your kids to explore a crumbling stone hospital perched over a deep spring with no lifeguard anywhere in sight? One wrong step on those rocks, and the only help you'll get is whatever the ranger can manage, if they reach you in time. And if you think that's dark, wait until you see our next town, a place with modern trauma, whispered ghost stories, and nowhere near enough streetlights. Number 3. WINDYVILLE. WINDYVILLE is the kind of place you miss if you blink too long on the highway. It sits quietly along the Niangua River, not far from Bennett Spring, where families gather to fish and campers show off brand new tents they don't yet know how to use. On a map, WINDYVILLE is just a dot, but in ghost hunting circles, it's practically VIP, the kind of tiny village that shows up on forums, late-night radio shows, and those top 10 haunted Ozark spots lists locals pretend they don't read. The picturesque calm is only the surface. WINDYVILLE once had more people, more houses, even a lively little post office. Today, the population hovers around 50, barely enough to field a small softball team. Over the last 20 years, the number has dropped by more than half, leaving empty homes, shuttered buildings, and long stretches of silence where there should be neighbors. It feels like the town aged faster than anyone intended, and the empty spaces picked up their own personalities. Then come the stories, because WINDYVILLE always has stories. People talk about screams echoing from the old tomato cannery long after the machinery was hauled away. Visitors claim to have seen a shadowy rider drifting across the cemetery hill, and more than a few say they've heard children laughing outside at midnight, even though almost no children live there. Local newspapers and regional magazines have openly called WINDYVILLE one of the most haunted spots in the Ozarks, which is not the kind of tourism slogan you get to choose for yourself. Adding to the atmosphere is something far more real than a ghost story. Nearby Moon Valley became the center of the highly publicized Cassidy Rainwater criminal case in 2021-2023, a case that shook the entire state and cast a darker shadow over the surrounding communities. Even though WINDYVILLE wasn't the crime scene, the association was enough to deepen its existing mystique, a place already known for eerie legends suddenly linked to real-world horror. It's the kind of combination that sticks. Walk around at night and the town lives up to its name. Wind rips through the trees with a lonely howl. Fog crawls across the fields and clings to fences like it's trying to listen. Porch lights are few, car headlights even fewer, and the cemetery by the roadside seems to watch every passerby with quiet patience. You don't hear traffic here. You hear wind and maybe something riding on it. WINDYVILLE is what happens when a town loses people but gains stories, a retirement home for both humans and ghosts. So here's the question. Would you rent a cheap cabin knowing the ghost population might outnumber the real one? And remember, when a place is locally famous for both real-life horror and supernatural tales, that's usually your sign to keep driving. Still think it's just small-town gossip? Our next entry wasn't abandoned by rumors. It was wiped off the map by a chemical so toxic the government literally bought everyone out. Number 2. Times Beach. Times Beach began as the kind of cheerful, low-budget dream Americans used to love. A tiny summer getaway on the Merrimack River, a place where St. Louis families could buy a cheap lot, set up a cabin and spend weekends reading newspapers on porches while kids rode bicycles along dusty dirt roads. Route 66 ran straight through the heart of it, and for decades Times Beach felt like the relaxed, unpretentious cousin of every bigger Missouri vacation town. It started as a discount summer escape, and for a while it worked, but the town's downfall came. From a problem no one saw coming: dust. The dirt roads kicked up so much that residents complained constantly, so the city hired a man to spray used oil on the streets. It seemed like a simple fix. Unfortunately, that oil was contaminated with dioxin, one of the most hazardous industrial chemicals ever created. What began as a quick solution quietly became one of the largest civilian toxic exposure events in American history. Then nature joined in at the worst possible moment. In 1982, just as testing confirmed dangerous contamination, a massive Merrimack River flood swallowed the town. Homes were drenched, streets were buried in mud, and Times Beach suffered what locals still call the double disaster: poison from above, water from below. Any hope of rebuilding evaporated when federal health officials concluded the town was no longer safe for residents. The CDC recommended against resettlement. The EPA stepped in, bought out every home, relocated more than 2,000 people, and eventually destroyed the contaminated soil in a high-temperature incinerator. By the time the project ended, Times Beach no longer existed as a town, just a memory buried beneath layers of regulation, paperwork, and grass. Today, the area has been reborn as Route 66 State Park, a peaceful green space with trails, picnic tables, and a pleasant river view. Families pass through unaware that they're walking over what used to be a neighborhood grid. The only hints are a few informational signs, the old bridge, and foundations hidden under the grass. For most visitors, it's just another state park, and that, the disappearance, the silence, the normalcy, is exactly what makes it eerie. Times Beach is a reminder of what happens when cheap shortcuts outrun science. It's the town that died so the EPA could learn what not to do. They didn't just dust control the roads with poison, they paved over an entire community. So let me ask, would you let your kids play in a park built on top of a town that had to be erased from the map? The signs say it's safe now. The question is whether you trust the signs or the fact that nobody lives here anymore to disagree. And yet, as chilling as a poison ghost town is, our number one spot combines something even darker. A long trail of crime, a pre-Civil War hotel, and enough ghost stories to keep you awake all week. Number 1. Morse Mill. Morse Mill looks peaceful at first glance, the kind of quiet Missouri riverside village where life moves slowly and the trees look older than the houses. Big River flows past in a lazy curve, and the countryside feels almost like a postcard. Green fields, tall oaks, and the kind of old farmhouses that make history buffs reach for their cameras. At the top of the hill stands the Morse Mill Hotel, a hulking pre-Civil War building that on paper sounds like the perfect place for a heritage tour. But if you spend more than 5 minutes reading about this place, the tone changes fast. Morse Mill has a secret, and it's not the kind small towns brag about. This is the birthplace of Bertha Gifford, a woman suspected of killing as many as a dozen people with arsenic in the early 1900s. She lived just up the road, walked these same paths, and was considered by some historians to be one of America's earliest female serial killers. The town doesn't advertise that on souvenir magnets. Then there's the hotel itself, a structure with more personalities than any building should ever have. Over the years, it has been a hospital, a brothel, a speakeasy, a stagecoach stop, and a refuge for people down on their luck. Every era left its own fingerprints, and almost none of them were cheerful. Guests have reported unexplained footsteps in empty hallways, voices whispering in corners, and the sound of children running when no families were staying there. Paranormal teams have filmed shadowy movement, recorded odd EVPs, and left with more questions than answers. Even people who don't believe in ghosts admit the atmosphere is unnerving. The wooden floors creak even when no one is walking. The hallways feel too narrow, the windows too tall, the rooms strangely cold even in July. Outside, the big river looks peaceful, but rescue reports from over the years quietly remind visitors that the water has its own dangers. It's the kind of place where the environment itself feels like part of the story. Morse Mill's darkness didn't come from a single event. It grew from a history of frontier violence, medical improvisation, social inequality, and decades of whispered stories. As one local once said, "This isn't just a haunted hotel. It's a mess nobody ever truly cleaned up." So here's the real question. Would you spend the night in a place where a real-life serial killer grew up nearby, and where guests still claim something touches them in the dark? The hotel may be closed, but the road is still here, the river is still here, and so are the stories. Visit if you want, just don't expect a restful night. Not every quiet town is safe, and not every pretty view means a happy history. Places like these remind us that the forgotten corners of America aren't just slow, they're scarred. Some were poisoned, some were drowned, some were destroyed by greed, and others were shaped by tragedies no one ever fully understood. When you walk through them, you're not just seeing abandoned buildings, you're seeing the consequences of what happens when a country looks away from its smallest communities. So now I want to hear from you, which one creeped you out the most? And be honest, which one are you secretly tempted to visit just for the thrill? If this opened your eyes to the darker side of small-town America, hit like, subscribe, and tell me which state we should expose next. There are plenty of stories left, and some of them are much darker than you think.